it's funny, I was earlier at Keith Donahue's talk, and he was talking about how at 40, he decided he wanted to try to write a novel, that it was something he had aspired to his whole life, and he was going to give it a try. And I don't know if Keith saw the look of shock on my face, because that is my story. At 40 years old, I was a national intelligence officer for NSA, and I said, you know, before I die, I want to see if I can actually write a novel. It's something that I'd always wanted to try to do. And you don't think you're going to get published. You just think at the time, you know, let's see if I can master this very complex thing. And 10 years later, my book actually did sell and was published. And as Thomas alluded to, we've been very, very lucky. The Taker's done very well. Not only was it starred by Booklist, it was actually picked as one of the top 10 debut novels of last year by the American Library Association. So very proud of that. Thank you very much. All for this silly novel with magic in it, which is what my friends at CIA said when I told them what I was getting published. So today I'm going to try to talk to you a little bit about The Taker, and it's really hard because, as Thomas conveyed to you, it's a sort of strange, indescribable story. It's been compared a lot to Interview with the Vampire, but not because there's vampires in it, and The Historian, and not because there's vampires in it. And you might notice that those are two pretty distinctly different books right there. It's also been compared to the Outlander books by Diane Gabaldon. And what it has in common with all these books is it has a lot of elements from different genres. So there's a historical element to it, and there's what you might call love elements in it. It's a very dark love story, and fantasy elements, and even horror elements. But the thing that a lot of reviewers say about it that I am very proud of is that it's like no book that most of them have ever read. It's a kind of funny, unique book. So I thought, well, how am I going to get readers to relate to this book? And I thought I'd talk to you a little bit today about fairy tales. Now here I'm going to step aside because, yet again, Keith Donahue's in the audience, and Keith can take me to school on fairy tales. So I'll try not to just and melt into a puddle of butter. But so I'm going to talk to you about fairy tales today. And I know this is a little bit of a pop topic these days, a little popular. There's so many movies and television shows right now with so much interest. For instance, you probably heard about the movie that's coming out, Snow White and the Huntsman, which is supposed to be a dark retelling of Snow White. And there are TV shows like Grimm and Once Upon a Time. It's like it's the zeitgeist of the moment. But I will say that The Taker and the other two books in the trilogy come about this relationship very honestly, because they are sort of based on folk and fairy tales. I won't say it's explicit, but there's a backbone of folk and fairy tales running through it, one for each book. And I'll tell you what it is for The Taker at the end of this. But the books were also written to evoke fairy tales through the descriptions, even through the cadence of the sentences. I wanted you to feel in some, like, haunting way that you were in a fairy tale, and that you were getting that same strange, dislocated feeling you get when you read fairy tales, as though you're in a dream. And I think the reason why, you know, not only the movies are popular, but there's so many books too that are starting to be based on fairy tales, or not starting to, so many books that are out there that actually have fairy tale as the basis, is because these stories resonate with us. Fairy tales were often built on older stories, fables, and then going back further still, legends and myths. And any of you who are fans of Joseph Campbell, which is, you know, this whole sort of comparative religion and mythology thing that he popularized 20 years ago, you know, this is a familiar story to you all. That there are common myths that run through all religions. These stories are meant to explain the mysteries of the world. So in primitive societies, when they didn't understand the natural phenomena that were happening around us, they developed these stories to try to explain the world to them. These myths started out as symbolic, but eventually became to be interpreted a bit more literally, and that's where we get legends. So you have this commonality now of myths and legends, fables and fairy tales. And all these stories tap into what Jung called the collective unconscious. That perhaps there is these relics of ancient memory that reside in our DNA in each and every one of us. And that's why these stories sort of ring true. It's almost like when you hear them, it's almost like it's hearkening back to something that you knew, almost in the pre-birth. that singing is really something, isn't it? Because I worked at NSA, I have the hearing of a dog. I mean, I can hear people opening up tissue packages in their car, like at the next thing. So this is like piercing through my head. I'll try not to sing along. So we don't live in the same world where fairy tales were born, but it is the same world of my book, The Taker. And if you can sort of, it's a little hard for modern people, I'm going to go after him, it's sort of hard for modern people to put themselves into it. And I'll tell you, the big thing is electricity. Ever since our world was electrified, we do not live in the same world that used to exist, where darkness really reigned supreme, and you would be swallowed up completely by darkness as soon as the sun went down. And there was only illumination as far as the light of a candle would fall. And it's easy to understand in those days that the outdoors, anything that fell beyond that light of the candle, was a dangerous place, and there was all kinds of evil waiting for you out there. In those circumstances, it's easy to believe in ghosts and evil spirits and magic. And these are the stories that were told at night around the fireplace. This is how our forefathers entertained each other. There's a lot of things that are great about fairy tales, that are worthwhile. They're cautionary tales. They're meant to teach us lessons. So these are stories that teach us the value of compassion, of honesty and bravery. And often the hero is an ordinary boy or girl who's been given a task. And I know there's a lot of princesses, but it's usually the youngest princess. It's the most ordinary of the royal family. And in the stories, you're challenged. The main character must overcome odds to achieve her end. And they're often aided by a magical creature who's sort of their guide on the journey into the other world. So if you know Joseph Campbell, you know that I just described the hero's journey. It's a very famous Campbell motif. And it's a very famous formula. I shouldn't say formula because it's not a formula, but it's a very famous pattern that you get in storytelling, not only in myth but in all storytelling. Screenwriters use the hero's journey quite a bit to format their stories. For me, I'd have to say, sure, fairy tales sort of rang true, but the reasons they appealed to me when I was a girl, there's a lot of reasons. One is that I wanted a pony. And there are a lot of horses in fairy tales, so. But also, as I described, the hero was often a girl, often the youngest, and I was the youngest girl in my family, youngest of 3. And fairy tales told you that if you worked, you didn't have to be born with advantages. You didn't have to be born in the richest family in the village. You didn't have to be born a prince or a princess. But if you worked hard and were honest, you would get what you wanted. And of course, there was magic. And who among us does not want to believe in magic? Because, we're all adults here. Life asks very difficult things of us. Things happen to us that we certainly wish we could wish away. Loved ones get sick and die. We lose our pets. We're at work and all our hard work is not appreciated and sort of denigrated. And people who don't work nearly as hard as you walk away with all of the credit. Maybe your boss. Things that you don't want to accept, but you have no choice. But if there were magic in the world, it would be a different story. Who wouldn't want to find a magic key that opens a magic door and leads you to a magic kingdom where none of your troubles exist? And there's other truths in fairy tales. Fairy tales tell you that there are going to be monsters. No one else will tell you that. You tell them there's a monster or a bad thing, and people will go, no, that doesn't exist. But a fairy tale won't do that to you. And from fairy tales you learn that it's not always your fault if bad things happen to you. Now, I was born a Catholic, and that means that you are responsible and guilty for things that haven't even happened yet. Right? I mean, most of us growing up, I'm seeing a lot of nods of recognitions. There's Catholics out there. People don't tell you those things. They want you to believe in justice and that, if things, that'll happen, that you'll never be blamed. But a fairy tale won't lie to you. Bad things will come out of the blue that you have no power to control. Fairy tales also tell you that there are people who are born with everything in life, everything, every privilege, who are sometimes spoiled and mean, like evil stepsisters or investment bankers. So, there are all these things that as a child you know, in your heart of hearts, but it's nice to see it in writing. The other thing about fairy tales that I liked is that it didn't sugarcoat things. Again, doesn't lie to you. And fairy tales, especially the old ones, Grimm and his predecessors, not the Disney ones, but the old ones, they hint at a darkness in the world that really exists. Some of these things are darknesses that are not spelled out because the stories are also meant for children. They were meant for adults, but they were meant for children too. And this kind of goes back to that collective unconscious. Even if you didn't know specifically what the darkness is that the fairy tale was alluding to, you could feel the truth in it. You knew that there were bad things waiting out in the world. Again, maybe waiting for you.